All right, cool. Yay! We are
Yay.
recording. Hello, I'm Evie. If you are watching this video, you already know who I am. But in today's video, I'm joined by a few awesome people to talk about the second book, arguably the best book in the Dune Chronicles, Dune Messiah. And if you haven't checked it out before, I would highly recommend you check out the discussion video that I know, Andrew, you were in, talking about Dune, and that was over on Joanna Sousa's channel. I'll leave that link down below. And any future discussions of future books that we do, I will also leave linked down below whenever we do have those. But before we actually get into the discussion itself, I'm going to go ahead and allow you guys to introduce yourselves.
Are you pointing at me?
Yes,
Okay.
my directions are actually working this time. So
Okay, fair enough. I've got it easy because I'm just gonna point down at Pete. But I'm Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads. I read sci-fi, fantasy. Just have a good old time, act silly in front of the camera, and hopefully get people to try a new book every now and then. So that's me. And now it's time for Pete's turn.
I'm also, I like talking about books and slightly acting silly sometimes as I get comfortable with the camera more and more. I'm Ponderings of Pete. That's the channel, not Ponderings of the other stuff. I'm just being facetious down there. There.
you're being thematically rich and relevant. So.
Thematically rich, yes. The 1% thematically rich. I talk about fantasy, sci-fi, some nonfiction sometimes. I've really liked Dune so far. I think I've read Dune like twice back in the day, and then I just read Dune Messiah and then Children of Dune. And it has a lot to say about things that I really just have been, pondering recently. So I like it.
Dutch.
That way.
Hi, my name is Joanna from the channel Joanna, and I cover a lot of fantasy and sci-fi on my channel because I love fantasy. I love Dune. Dune is actually one of my favorite books of all time. I've only read it twice, but I loved it so much both times I read it. And I'm so excited to have this discussion here today. So thank you, Evie, for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you three about this book.
Yes, awesome. Yes, I'm very excited that you guys agreed to talk about it because I know a lot of people look at Dune Messiah as just, oh, it's just a continuation of Dune or it's a bridge between Dune and Children of Dune. But we are focused on Dune Messiah and its greatness. So I guess my first question to you guys, and I'm gonna maybe we can just kind of start from here, is spoiler-free version thoughts of how you liked it.
Anybody want to start?
So I guess I'll start. It's been a while since I read it because I know we've had some scheduling conflicts. But from like what I think I read it like a month and a half ago. And from what I remember, I had a couple structure issues where some characters would just disappear, and then like some weight would be like forced in with like our real world history, which I never expected from Dune. But I remember enjoying the themes, and like as we get through the story, we figure out like what Paul stands for and what's really important to Paul. And we find out that he's just this tragic to me. He is kind of a tragic, misunderstood character who is just caught up in a circumstances that he was just trying to survive the events of Dune, and now is dealing with those ramifications that have just kind of snowballed, and he's basically become this figure for this jihad, this galactic jihad, and there's really no stopping it. And he had a choice to make. He made the choice, and we're seeing him deal with the consequences. And I enjoyed that.
That's beautifully said. I'll just piggyback off that because I totally agree with what you said. I think in this book, we do see Paul as a more tragic figure. I think that's how I interpreted it, for the very reasons that Andrew basically pointed out, that it's sort of like this commentary on sort of a figurehead or Godhead and how that becomes even bigger than the individual. And at a certain point, he did have a choice, like you said, Andrew. And so we just see the consequences of choice there, but at the same time seeing sort of how the echoes or reverberations of being a figurehead go beyond the individual too, and our part to play in that too. So very interesting. I do know that this, I think like in the forward of this book, it was described by, is it Brian Herbert, as a bridge novel between Dune and Children of Dune, the term that you, but of course I do, even though he called it that, I still feel like there's a lot to unpack in this book. And I think the plot is actually pretty intricate for being such a short book. So um, I still really enjoyed it. I thought it was an amazing continuation of themes that we saw in Dune, and maybe even a further development of them, and it brought to light characters that we knew in Dune, but we get to know way more in depth in this book too. So it was a very interesting reading experience for me. I'm very intrigued, very excited to move on from here too.
Yeah, I definitely have some similar thoughts. I like this. I like this as a continual exploration, kind of as a, I don't know, almost a contextualization of Dune to a certain extent. We got a lot more character work in this one, I think. So like with Paul, like seeing him as a tragic figure versus seeing him as like the head of the jihad that we see in Dune. You definitely can view him in completely different lights, because like in Dune you can take Paul's character as like, you know, either you can see him as a messiah, like legitimately as like, oh my gosh, this guy's so amazing, or you can see him as, oh my gosh, he's kind of low-key using the Fremen a little bit, it feels like. But I think Dune Messiah is an excellent contextualization of some of that into the whole like, hey, he was kind of caught up in a lot of this, and he, you know, just used who he was to survive. It's also a excellent exploration of the slavery of prescience, I think is the way I would put it, because there was a quote from Children of Dune that really describes some of my thoughts really well, and I can't recall it off the top of my head, but it's basically talking about the events of Dune Messiah. It's like that Paul was free, but he wasn't free. That by seeking more freedom, he found less of it. So.
Yeah, I think I think just exactly what you guys said. It's a really good continuation of those themes that Frank Herbert was exploring in Dune, and however accurate this is, I can see how Dune Messiah as a singular book kind of upends the expectations and the possible kind of glorification that people might have seen of Paul in Dune. Again, I don't know how accurate that is, that he specifically wrote Dune Messiah to kind of say, yeah, you're not supposed to glorify this guy, or if he had planned that from the beginning. And I really like that. The other aspect that I really liked about Dune Messiah is that it's much more self-contained, and it has a much tighter arc within it, rather than feeling you still get the world, and you know the expanse of the world, but as opposed to Dune, where you at least for me, you really feel just the world itself and the just grandness of it. Dune Messiah felt much smaller, much more focused, and I mean, to me, it's kind of like a murder mystery type plot element to it, which I really enjoyed. So.
Well, yeah, we spend so much time, you know, in Dune, we spend a lot more time in Arrakis as a whole. But, I mean, a lot of this is spent in the palace in Dune Messiah. So we're not getting, you know, constantly going out into the sands or visiting. Like, some of that happens, but it's mostly mentioned, and it's like stuff that's off screen. And so it feels more like a tight beam focus on Paul's daily life. Because, I mean, even in Dune, we get that like 2-year time jump on Arrakis where we're just spending time out in the sands. And instead of that, we're getting, you know, all these little tiny conspiracy theories, all these individual meetings, and we're focusing more on people and their personal politics rather than kind of galactic politics. It feels a little bit more personalized to me.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. That was something, I think that would be a way I would describe this book too. It feels much more self-contained, as you said, Evie, and for the very reasons that you both brought up. And yeah, it was interesting. I did really enjoy the more. I enjoyed this. It was very different than Dune. I think it's good to go in with different expectations. That it's not going to be quite that same scope as Dune, because Dune, for me, it just felt so big. And I think this just feels a lot more contained, like I said. But I think that if you go in knowing that, I think it's maybe more likely to be a more enjoyable experience. But if you're expecting something quite like Dune, I could see why people maybe struggle with this one a little bit more. Because I know a lot of people do. I mean, I know I've heard that before, that this one is less popular. But I do think that that probably is the result of expectations, I'm going to guess.
Yeah, I definitely, I'd agree with that.
I also think that there are definitely, I think there are people out there that didn't necessarily enjoy Dune as much because of how grand a scope Dune was, how heavy on the world building, heavy on just like the epicness of Dune it is. And I think this would be an excellent book to read after it to get more of that character focus, since we are so much more focused on Paul and Johnny and the others.
Well, one of the things I do remember being, you know, been very positive, being a slightly bit weaker, is the whole conspiracy felt very odd and kind of like shoestring together. Like it didn't flow super well. Like it's not something that you can logically follow very well because what's that? Is it the Bene Gesserit?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Bene Gesserit are like orchestrating everything. And so they know how the conspiracy goes, but you as the reader are just going to have to kind of sit back and accept it on face value. Because a lot of the times you're just going like, I don't get it. Like I get this piece of it, but I don't see how this piece relates to that piece, which then leads to that piece, which then ends up at this result. Mm-hmm. And so it's one of those where it's just like, yeah, you can't really question it. It's going off of, it's using prescience to develop a conspiracy theory. Or not, theory? A conspiracy. There we go. A plot. There we go.
You know, that makes sense. To kind of totally switch gears and go someplace else. You know, we talked a little bit about Paul. So for me, Paul's character, I don't, even though he was kind of the focus, I felt like this was more Cheney's story than Paul's. And by focusing on her, it's really Paul's relationship with her and how everything kind of revolves around that, if that makes sense. Like the prescience and all that and the mystery involved, it's all focused on Cheney, which we can definitely get into spoilers at this point. So I don't know, did you guys like Cheney in this, or did you have any kind of changed perceptions of her as a character?
I'll let somebody else speak first because I keep running my mouth.
I liked her increased involvement in this book. That's something that I'm kind of hype for the second Dune movie as well. Is it's going to be more Cheney focused from what I've heard, and I always thought in Dune the book that she felt kind of lacking and that there was room for, I guess, more there. So I think this is an excellent follow-up to kind of her story from Dune, where she lost a child. I believe that she lost her child in battle, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We barely get to see the child. We don't even see the child on screen.
Yeah, we're just told Dune, that there is a child.
And then he's dead.
Yes.
So I think that's an exploration of somewhat of Chaney's grief years after the fact, as well as just the politics. It's interesting how Paul, to a certain extent, mirrors his father as well. With like, okay, you know, I'm not going to marry the woman that I actually love, even though Paul's father didn't necessarily have a wife. And honestly, I'm starting to view a lot of these things also in context of, ooh, how could these be adapted? Just because, like, I know Villeneuve wants to do 3 movies, and I think this is probably the one I'm really excited for him to adapt.
Yeah.
Because there's such a good interesting foundation that he can kind of extrapolate from the end of Dune, and there's more he can extrapolate a little bit on in this book and make just the end of the trilogy fantastic.
Yeah, I want to say I really enjoyed Chani's character. I tend to enjoy that kind of contrast because Paul is, I don't know, he's not the most emotionally dramatic character for good reason. I mean, he's taking in a lot of information. There's a lot going on. I enjoy his character, but with her, she's just so human to me, and I appreciate that, and I liked how she's so, to me, she's believable because of the society she comes up, because she's Freeman, and just the way she sort of thinks outside of herself. She wants to have Paul's child, I think, you know, of course, after they lost their child in Dune. But I think it's meaningful to her that she not only wants to have his child, but it seems even more meaningful to her that he has an heir. So it's like she thinks more about him than she does about herself, I think, at that point. And it's just, it's an interesting dynamic with her and Irulan for sure. But I feel like we see a lot of emotional shifts with Chani, like from that perspective of her tackling this issue of the heir to the whole scene. I'm trying to think ahead, like to when she does get pregnant and when she does find out that Irulan was basically putting contraceptives in her food or whatever, and the anger she feels about that. And I don't know, just seeing her kind of go through the phases of all these different emotions and her desire for Paul to meet her as a lover. And sorry, my phone telling me to go to bed. But yeah, basically she wants, in my opinion, to have this domestic life with Paul. And it's sort of a struggle for her to see him in this sort of chosen one role. And she's having to grudgingly accept that, and at the same time trying to think outside of herself too. So I just enjoyed her inner conflict. I thought it was very well portrayed for me in the story, and for some reason I just found it very, very believable to me personally. I know that the characters in Dune get a lot of criticism, but I like Chani. I like Paul. I like the characters. So
yeah, I think for me, she's the most consistent character. And I say that not to say that none of the other characters have their own consistencies or anything like that, but especially from Dune and then continued in Dune Messiah here, a lot of the characters that had experiences or relationships with Paul, they shift. They, instead of treating him like a person, they start treating him like a messiah. And that's another thematic element that runs through here of like, I think Paul struggles with, well, are they going to treat me like a man, or are they going to treat me like I've become this head of this figurehead of the jihad religion, whatever you want to call it. And even Stilgar is treating him like this figurehead, but Chaney doesn't do that. She's consistent in how she sees him, treats him, their relationship together. And I think that makes Paul's treatment of her, not treatment of, but his interactions and the choices that he makes regarding her that much more, I don't want to say difficult, but much more poignant.
yes, I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think there's this conflict with Paul where he wants I feel like she is the center of his life. Oh, hi cat. Sorry. She is the center of his world, and he's trying to protect her because I would argue that he actually knew about the contraceptives that Irulan was giving.
I'm pretty sure he straight up says he knew.
Yeah. Okay.
He knew.
Yeah.
He knew, but he let it ride because of the prescient vision.
Right, because he wanted to protect Chani.
Yeah, he knew if she
And,
conceived, she would die, and then
Right.
he would have he wouldn't have her anymore.
Right.
Um,
There's this like kind of
Yeah.
conflict of like love but selfishness at the same time to ensure she lives. So
well, one of the because everybody's pretty much covered everything except for one of the things that I want to mention is that despite the story is very much contextually Chani, however you pronounce it, she doesn't get a lot of page count though, and so for it to be so much about her, what Frank Herbert did is he basically contextualized the story to like basically everything Paul's doing is to protect the love of his life, even if she doesn't want it. And eventually, like, she has to sit him down and say, I don't care. Like, this is basically my choice, my life. Let me live it. And if I want to live it for you, you have to let me. And so eventually, like, he caves in, even though he knows what that's going to mean. And it's really, really interesting to see how Paul interacts with all of his counselors and everybody who's like, why don't you just marry the princess? He's like, because I don't love that woman. That woman's a snake. And which is a whole nother issue. Like, I don't remember. Did she just pull a vanishing trick and vanish out of the book after she was discovered? Like, she never pops back up again.
She kind of goes.
Yeah, she just kind of flies off and just, okay, bye.
Well, to be fair, Paul starts running around everywhere, and she just doesn't follow. And I think I'm pretty sure she pops up in the very last scene, though.
Does she?
I've
got the book right here.
To her. I know there's reference to her, something about her stepping outside, like leaving the Bene Gesserit. Is that right?
yeah,
She's on the last page.
Yeah.
She pops up.
She's mentioned on the last page.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's more a mention.
Yeah, it's a mention. She doesn't pop back up. It's something about saving her life. But
I'm assuming we haven't seen the last of her, but
probably not. But she'll be because I think it's like a 14-year time jump into Children of Dune.
I think it's like 9 or 10 years, right?
Yeah,
it's 9. Yeah, they're 9 at the start of the first Children of Dune.
Yeah, so at this point she would be in her 40s or 50s,
something like that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
What did y'all think of Duncan Idaho?
I was just about to say that, but I didn't want to like steer the conversation. I was about to be like, what did y'all think of Duncan?
I think it's fascinating because, I mean, I did not expect that. I did not expect that whole entire storyline. The goal? What I can't remember.
Oh gosh, yeah. Not Getty Prime. Oh, it's in my head. I know. Can't pronounce it for the life of me.
Whatever type of
I think I voxered Evie and like was chatting with her when I was reading that scene, and I think we discussed that I thought it was writer's remorse. And I think even in the foreword, I think it's mentioned that it's writer's remorse.
Oh wow!
And that Frank Herbert didn't kind of regretted killing Duncan, and so wanted to think of a way to bring him back.
Well, he brought him back.
Nothing that Brian Herbert says, just to let you know.
It's in the forward, but it feels very much that way.
Well, yeah, because he does fully come back. That's the thing, right?
Pretty much, yes. He fully comes back at the end.
At the end, and it was interesting. Leading up to there, it was almost like it almost felt to me like he was almost like kind of cyborgish in a way or something, like playing off that trope a little bit. It's like, is this a person? Because it's not really Duncan, but it sort of is.
I think it's like his flesh where they've grafted a new personality on it and then like added some of the mannerisms into that new personality. So it's underneath, but like
Well,
they put new software on top.
Well, what I'm saying is, like, up until he really becomes Duncan Idaho, I feel like as a reader, we're kind of questioning. I don't know. I felt like I was questioning, can I trust this? You know, is
Right.
this an
Well, 'cause
abomination?
My
they
favorite
do,
parts was he was like, "I'm totally a trap," and
Yeah.
Paul's just like, "Yeah, okay,
Wrong
whatever."
way.
He's like, "No, I'm a trap."
He's
Like,
like, I'll be fine. I'm gonna give you a
well,
rat.
that's part of his Mentat training that he was put through, right? Like he cannot lie. Like so.
yeah, the
Oh.
doctor shouldn't have been able to lie either, and he did it.
I mean, technically, he just omitted any truths. So
Wait, so Mentat training, I'm sorry, so that makes it so you can't lie? Is that what you said?
the Mentat stuff is like the computer stuff, but the Souk, the Souk school, right?
Yeah,
Is
the
that
Souk
what it was?
school,
I
the
think
diamond
he's
Souk thing.
Wasn't he also trained in that as well, or no?
I don't think so.
Okay, maybe it was just. Never mind.
Yeah, but
But
he
the
was straight up. He was like, "Nah, I'm a trap." Like, what should I do with you? You should probably kill me. Like,
He says that too. He's like, you should totally get rid of me.
it was so great seeing him again.
But it does raise a good question. I'm like, why was he so transparent? But you're right. I think you're right, Evie. It was tied something into his training. There was something.
Well,
Well,
it was like
right?
he was. I could
I
have
think it was
swore.
political honesty. Is what it comes down to.
Honesty?
Is basically it was basically like the double bluff almost of, hey, here's a political gift. You can't really reject it. Hey, just so you know, I'm a trap. Oh, you're just telling me that so that other ramifications and then counterplot, riposte.
Well, also like
Oh,
Mentats
you know what it
are
was?
quite literally human computers. So like,
Or was it a chip in the brain? Was it something like that?
No,
I mean they
chips
are
don't
human
happen.
computers. So like, this universe doesn't have any sort of technology or computers anymore. So the Mentats, like,
That's cool.
he will give all the information that he can to be able to give
An accurate battle plan.
Yeah, and the best decision.
So, if I remember, I think I just remember this. It was a way out. So it's a Tleilaxu tradition that when they set something up for somebody to fail or something like that, or to kill them, or they take this contract to take down Paul, they have to leave the person that is the object of their contract a way out. And the way out was that Duncan Idaho was completely honest and would tell Paul if he directly asked him.
That's correct. I think that is correct. I vaguely remember that.
It's all coming back to me now.
So fascinating. Yeah. And Aaliyah's role in that was interesting too.
I'm not gonna lie, I don't remember Aaliyah.
I don't.
You don't remember the conversations around whether Paul and Alia should have an heir? You don't remember that? Nope. All right, cool, fine.
He's not. Weird. He's blocking it out on purpose because it's really weird.
It was very weird.
Oh, his sister. Yeah, the weird stuff. Okay, sorry.
And then all of a sudden, she's like, just like exercising without clothes, and it's like,
yeah.
Please stop.
That was odd.
Pete's just like, please stop.
I bet you anything though they're going to adapt that scene. I'm going to bet money.
God, I hope not.
That scene is going to be adapted because you know how adaptations are right now. It's all about like, let's put sex sells, that kind of thing. So
at the very least, they could just do like a shoulders above shot, and it'd be fine.
They're not.
That's what they did in the Children of Dune series. So
yeah. But
I had forgotten about that. I had wiped that from my brain.
I want to.
And now it's back, and I don't appreciate that.
I'm sorry.
So let's talk about something else, like how much worse than how did you all feel about the shoe-in with Hitler?
I'm trying to.
It's like a 2-page thing where they're going through Earth documents.
Yes.
And basically, he's just like, back on Earth, there was this guy named Hitler. And yeah, he killed so many people. I've killed about 1 million times more than this guy. What will history say about me? I think is basically the gist of it.
I had forgotten about that.
Well, it felt very weird because it was Dune is set so far into the future and like galaxies, who knows where. To mention a specific individual who was still, at the time of printing, was still very much in the public zeitgeist and all that. The World War II is not that long ago. It's like 40 years, 30, 40 years. And it felt like a weird kind of shoe-in to kind of say, hey, I'm a monster, and here's this guy that you're totally going to know what I'm talking about. But, like, at the same time, it felt also, that was the moment I felt like where he had become a figurehead of something he didn't really believe in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think...
sorry, go ahead.
I think this gives credence to the theory of Herbert wrote Dune, and he made it. His point was that he wanted people to be like, you know what, following a charismatic leader ain't that good. And then people started hero worshiping Paul after reading Dune, and he's like, I need to write some more books to help them understand what I'm saying. So this is more of a thing that he's kind of like, obviously, like, hey guys.
Yeah. And then they started hero worshiping him, saying, you're the guru of science fiction.
Irony.
He's like, I'm nobody.
when I first heard of Dune Messiah, I had heard that, and this was like before I'd even finished Dune, is Dune Messiah was the one where it turned Paul on his head and made him a villain. And so I was constantly expecting these villainous moments to come from Paul, because that's what I'd been told to expect. And I was like, that's why people don't like it. And it's really just like a page and a half thing that's just kind of pasted in the middle, where he's just like, yeah, my jihad's killed a bunch of people. Really, I'm just trying to keep my wife from dying. What's history going to write about me? And, they're probably going to get it wrong on why I did all this. And so then I finished the book, and I'm sitting there thinking, why did people tell me that he was this big villain when I didn't see them that way? I saw him as a tragic character. Like, to compare, Hitler, in at least in the frame of history, knew what he was doing. Paul was just trying to save his girlfriend, his wife at the time.
Well, I would argue that from Dune, like, taken into context of the first book, like, he and Jessica knew what they were doing. Like, they knew that they were taking advantage of the Fremen, who, by extension, the Bene Gesserit had, like, implanted this belief system into the Fremen society and culture. So they were taking advantage of that. And I wouldn't necessarily call it villainous, but it is definitely... It's
exploitive.
Exploitative.
It's exploitive.
So,
I still see him as a tragic character, where literally, because everything that they were trying to do was just focused on Arrakis. From a political aspect, I never understood him trying to become emperor. I never understood the Fremen even leaving Arrakis. Like, it's one of those deeper politic things that I just don't comprehend. And so that's just part of the story that I just have to accept. But, and I do feel like those are slightly weaker elements, just because it says the jihad will spread throughout the stars. So the jihad spreads throughout the stars. Like, that's how it works through the story. Other than that, though, it still feels like 2 pages just pasted in to make him seem way more villainous. But then it just kind of ignores it through the rest of the book when he's just trying to save Chani and his kids.
well, I think it's because you don't really see it on page. If you actually saw the atrocities and stuff like that on page, I think that would make it more overt, I guess.
I totally agree with that. I think I agree with both of you. I think that when you read this and not seeing the atrocities, not seeing the repercussions of the jihad, but just being told it, but it's all kind of happening off page, and you're just kind of zoomed into Paul caring about Chani and seeing how he's trying to protect her And it does, to me, feel like, I don't know, I did feel like Paul is, I felt like it was tragic in a way. Like I did feel that tragic element that you're talking about, Andrew. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, if I saw that, I'd probably feel totally differently. I don't know. I don't know if we do see any of that later on. I guess you can't tell us, but.
Well, we do see like certain soldiers who have been on other worlds, and like the Fremen who have gone off world, fought, been injured, and then the shape shifting person starts like killing them. I don't remember why. Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, Scytail or Skytail.
Yeah, I don't remember why he's killing people.
But we haven't seen the part, like here I found that quote. He says, I've killed 61 billion, sterilized 90 planets, and completely demoralized 500 others. I've wiped out the followers of 40 religions which had existed. And so I'm like, wow.
It gives you a running list, but then it never really comes back to it and drives the point home. And so, I mean, you guys forgot it.
Yeah. It's hard to keep that in your mind when you're not seeing it, you know, up close and personal.
And so, I mean, this is a very short book. So there was room, of course, to add the context, but I think this was all about hyper-focusing on their daily lives.
And I'm not saying it. Yeah, I think it did what it did for a purpose, for a reason. But
yeah, it's an interesting discussion point because it's like, okay, so we're focused on his daily life, but I mean, we're not shown of him being a monster. We're told, like, he says, I'm a monster. But then, like, you know, we've got this time jump where we don't really have any of the context of what the jihad has done, which I keep saying jihad. And I remember messaging Evie saying, I hate the word jihad now. I was just like, at this point, I'm sick and tired of the word jihad.
Well, so I think it's out of his control. And it continues with that conflict within Paul of like, no matter what I do, regardless of what I do, it's going to continue. Like, they'll either see me as a martyr or they're going to see me as this figurehead, and the jihad will carry on. I mean, if you make it like kind of allegorical to like Judeo-Christian like ideologies, like it's regardless, it's just going to spread like wildfire, and the power dynamics that this organization has, or this religion has, is going to just overpower everything in its path, because it really is a power play as much as it is, actually, if not more than it is an actual belief system. But
I remember at one point he was like, can I just have a body double go do my like whole Pope thing? They're not gonna know it's not me.
The Tililaxu could hook you up, man. Probably.
Well, I mean, he does have Alia kind of stand in for him as the presiding over. Oh gosh, I'm blanking on it, but presiding over like a religious kind of practice that they were having. Because he's like, you know, whatever, like she can do it, and she does it. Which I'm very excited for you guys to read what happens with her in Children of Dune. So
yeah,
from what I recall,
I'm really looking forward to that. And I guess it's so interesting because I'm just thinking back to certain quotes that really stuck out to me. I went ahead and kept a couple of them to the side here. And one, it was just the conversation he had with Chani at the beginning, which we've already talked about a lot, but just feeling like he's this figurehead, and like what you were saying, that it doesn't even matter. If he dies, this is still going to echo on in probably even bigger ways of him becoming a martyr and that kind of thing. And then like, I think there's an interesting, I mean, this whole book, it opens up with this weird interview with a historian prisoner. Is that right? In the dungeon there?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, which is really interesting to kind of show that critique of Paul. So that was interesting too. This has kind of some interesting structural elements in this book that I think are unique.
I don't remember.
Yeah,
I will say,
Oh, go ahead.
one thing that I just realized or just thought of as you were speaking, Joanna, is that I wonder if Paul's interactions with Cheney and his active prevention of her getting pregnant was the only control that he had.
That's
So
what I was
he-
gonna. Oh, yes. I'm so glad you brought that up, Evie, because
You and I
my
have the same
next
brain.
point, yes, because I wasn't going to bring up that specific point, but that's perfect because the next point I was going to bring up was about the prescience, because there's this whole entire part where he's trying to explain to people, like, I don't remember, he's in some kind of council meeting or something, and they don't get it. They're just like, this is chaos. Like, what's wrong with you? Can't you just figure out the future? And he's trying to explain. There's a specific way that he describes it. I'm going to go ahead and just read this quote. I'm sorry because I'm terrible about paraphrasing it. But he says the uninitiated try to conceive of prescience as obeying a natural law, Paul said. But it'd be just as correct to say it's heaven speaking to us, that being able to read the future is a harmonious act of man's being. In other words, prediction is a natural consequence in the wave of the present. It wears the guise of nature, you see, but such powers cannot be used from an attitude that restates aims and purposes. Does a chip caught in the wave say where it's going? There's no cause and effect in the oracle. Causes become the occasions of convections and confluences, places where the currents meet. Accepting prescience, I'm sorry if I'm saying that word wrong, by the way, you fill your being with concepts repugnant to the intellect. Your intellectual consciousness therefore rejects them. In rejecting, intellect becomes a part of the process and is subjugated. So I got, and the words that's a lot to take in. We could probably sit here and analyze that for a while, but just the idea of aims and purposes, like such powers cannot be used from an attitude that prestates aims and purposes, and sort of that causes become the idea of prediction is a natural consequence in the wave of the present. So it almost like
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
yeah, maybe. I guess I just wonder about in ponderings of free will over here. Maybe you can ponder this for us about free will and the role of that here. And like what you said, Evie, maybe there is a place for free will, but maybe that's the one kind of. I did kind of get a sense of that actually. Now that you point that out, Evie, like this was the one fine, like razor's edge of free will he could find to have some influence.
I will say before you hop in, Pete, is that the irony is that he's taking away Cheney's free will to be able to. And I think Pete, we actually had these conversations separately about, she desires to have this child. He's taking it away from her because he could just tell Irulan, done. Like he could bring it all to to the forefront that this is what Irulan's doing. She can go, not eat the food or whatever with the what do you call it? Oh gosh,
Contraceptive.
contraceptive. There you go. That's I was gonna say birth control. I'm like, that's not it. But yeah, so like he has the power to do that. He has the ability. He has the knowledge. He has all the skills, but he doesn't do that. So he's taking away Cheney's own free will by exacting his own.
Yeah, and he does that later too, right? By not bringing her back.
Yep.
In the way that Duncan, Idaho was brought back. That was a hard decision, but I mean, he saw that she could have been used. Either way, it seems like she was really just stripped of free will, no matter how you play it.
Yeah. I think with all these things of free will, and this is coming off of some more, there's a little bit more talking about this in Children of Dune. So some of it is coming from contextually from that for a little bit, but it's more just exploring it. It's not like adding events and then being like, oh, in light of these events, whatever. But so Paul talks about he's caught on a wave. And I think free will, when you're looking at yourself and you say that you have free will, you're talking about in the context in a very small context of you have the ability to choose. And I am a believer that we do have free will in everything. And I think, especially in this series, free will it's like a little bit like quantum mechanics. You have free will until you see that until it looks like you don't, because in this context, perception, because he observed the future becomes more firm, and thus it looks like he doesn't have more free will. So that his perception of the future and his like I think he's trying to say in that quote that you were talking about, Johanna, that it kind of seems like he's implying that he doesn't have goals or aims, but he does. I mean, just with his actions with Cheney, he does have goals and aims with
But I guess
mind.
what I gather from that is that he can't use this prescience with goals and aims. That was sort of how I interpreted it, but I'm not sure if I'm fully getting
that's kind of what that's definitely what he's saying, because it's almost impossible, because he perceives like certain, because he's viewing these futures, certain futures start to become more or less likely, because that also affects his choices because he's perceived them.
Mm-hmm.
So he eventually, because he's perceived so many futures and he's perceived so many choices and possibilities, the number of possibilities, it shrinks infinitely, slowly but surely, into one. And I think that's kind of what we see after he gets blinded, is everything has come to this, where there is really only one possible future, because he's eliminated all the others and he's put himself into a box, and I wouldn't say he's taken the free will of everybody else around him, but he's taken his own free will to a certain extent because of his predictive ability.
Yeah, and then it turns out to be wrong later on too. There are things that happen that he did not see. He did not see Chani was going to have twins, and I think there was something else too. I can't remember what it was, but just a couple things
on the flip side, I would actually like to talk more about his losing his sight. But on the flip side, though, Alia, and I just found like the specific passage that I'm thinking about, like I think she's a good kind of mirror to Paul, because she has the same abilities that he does, but her usage of them and her, I don't want to say lifestyle, but like her relationship with prescience is so completely different. Like she's essentially an addict, and she does a quote after she if I recall correctly, for context, like she overdoses on spice essentially, and she thinks possession of second sight has a tendency to make one a dangerous fatalist. And I think that's like she's like the other side of a coin that Paul is on, if that makes sense. And I really like how Frank Herbert depicted her and her abilities with prescience as a mirror to Paul's. So it's not just Paul that has it. So there's like two factors that are two forces at play. It's not just Paul.
I love that. I love that in general in books, when an author can show you multiple perspectives of some sort of theme or some sort of aspect. So I think that that's really interesting. Yeah. That's interesting. So he actually uses the word fatalist.
Yep.
Wow.
So, but going back to kind of Paul losing his sight and stuff like that, that he didn't see Leto the Second in all of his visions. He just saw Ganima, and it's in the moment that he sees Leto the Second that he loses his kind of prescient vision, or at least for a moment he sees it through Leto's eyes.
Isn't that how he makes the kill throw?
Yes.
Mhm.
So I thought that was just very symbolic, interesting scene, at least for me.
Yes. It was very, very interesting.
Doesn't Leto the second reach out to Paul though and be like, "Hey,"
Yeah.
Yeah.
because he was born fully formed.
Yeah.
Fully
Fully-
conscious.
Born like
Yeah.
Aliyah. Ugh.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But also different because
He's got both
Because of
sides.
the-
It's not just
the
maternal.
Chani and the
Yeah.
Chani and Paul.
That's right.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, it was so Paul, he gets the masculine side of things where he can see that, or sorry, he sees the prescience there. Alia, she can see her maternal line, and Leto just
You
sees
can see both.
can
Everything.
see both. Yeah, and that's explored in later books really, really
Yeah.
well, really
A lot.
interesting. So
And Duncan.
Alex says that the later book, or at least Children of Dune, got weird, is what
Listen.
he said.
Alex is weird, okay?
I like weird books, so
I'm excited
Yeah,
for the
weird.
weirdness. So
Yeah.
Children
here
of Dune
for it.
gets a lot more philosophical, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, Alan wouldn't like it. It's navel gazing. So.
It's a lot of navel gazing by a lot of unlikable characters.
We were
Oh,
talking last
yay.
night about how Alan likes naval battles, but he doesn't like naval gazing. So yeah, interesting. So and it's interesting too because this ends, of course, with Duncan and Aaliyah being lovers. So I'm guessing there's going to be probably some children there too. I don't know if that's also going to be included in Children of Dune, but I don't know. That's just a guess anyway.
Did they fully become lovers, or was it more of a?
They fully
Um,
became lovers.
Did
That's
they?
the
wasn't-
impression I got the very last
Yeah, and it
page.
was they
Like
became
I said, it's been
lovers
2
and-
months.
That's okay. It's been a while for me too.
yeah, they became lovers and like essentially Duncan is taking care of Alia to make sure she stays sane and doesn't overdose again, essentially, because of her addiction.
Yeah, they were making
I
enough
honestly didn't remember the addiction.
I forgot about it until I reread it. I'm like, oh, I totally forgot about this plot line.
It was interesting. Like that scene where she becomes very vulnerable around Duncan Idaho. It's like it almost seemed like she just set herself up for that.
Yeah.
Because she just like is lusting for him so hard. And it's kind of hard for her to
I mean,
be
Jason Momoa.
as intelligent.
Momoa.
Yes. Well, I mean, who could resist, right? So, but I mean, it would be it's like that's got to be kind of hard for her because she is as self-aware as she is. She's not just some naive teenager, but at the same time, so it's like almost like this vulnerable human part of her she can't control and has to grapple with. So it
Well, there
seems
was
like she
also
almost self-sabotages in order to allow sort of a Duncan heroic moment.
Yeah, well, I think if I recall correctly, I think that was also kind of an alternative or secondary plan for the Taloxu is like, all right, we're gonna have Height / Duncan seduce Alia, because she's 17, like she's biologically she's ready to I think they actually use the word breed.
It
or
was
something like
weird
that.
the way they talked about her that way. They're like, "Oh, we need to marry her off as soon as possible." She's like,
Ew.
it just felt
Yeah.
awkward to me. But
Mm.
yeah, I also I liked it at the same time. I have to admit,
Yeah.
but it was also like it's kind of awkward but weird. And were you all surprised, by the way, that Paul didn't choose for Chani to make Chani like Duncan? Were you all? I mean, I guess he had some insight that would go down a bad path. But I
No,
would imagine the temptation would be so strong. I mean, they were betting everything on Paul just weakening. I mean, that was the whole point of bringing Duncan, right? Was the ultimate point was to make him make that decision with Chani.
So
Yeah.
I think there's probably a moment's consideration there, but like he's politically savvy enough to immediately realize the ramifications of that decision and that there's no guarantee it would work. So
Yeah.
while he might have gotten Chaney's body back, the love of his life may not return because Duncan was the first to
Fully
break
came
that
back. Yeah.
to fully come back. And so, he might have, imagine your spouse dying, but your spouse has got an identical twin. It's not the same thing. Like, they're not the same person.
I could see what you're saying, Andrew, and you're right. But at the same time, you're not. I just don't think I would think rationally in that moment.
Yeah.
In that moment, just thinking of all the stages of grief and how much he loved Chani, and also thinking about how seemingly irrational it was that he ended up keeping Duncan Idaho around the whole book against his better judgment or against even Duncan Idaho's advice there.
It
So
does
to
show that he is a
me,
flawed character. I mean,
yeah,
he is very human,
yeah.
which I think is the whole point of the first book. He's human. He's flawed. He makes mistakes.
But that's also why it surprised me, because I actually do think it was the smarter decision not to bring Chani back. But it still surprised. I don't know. It surprised me.
I think at that point he knew his fate. I think at that point when he was offered that, he had the prescience to know I'm blind. It's my kid's turn. I'm walking into the desert.
Well, I think more than that, at least for me, up to that point, everything leading up to that, he's trying to protect Chaney. On one hand, protect Chaney, but at the same time, kind of, in hindsight, you could see it as potentially protecting himself. Sorry, my cat's going nuts. What are you doing, cat? Sorry. So he's protecting Chaney, but also protecting himself. And I think the conflict of being able to bring Chaney back because of his love for her, him denying that, I think he recognizes the power that the Taloxi would have over him.
Yeah.
Because, they would basically have complete control over him because if she died again.
And they would control her too. And I think that was the big thing, is that he realized he'd be bringing her into a life where she wouldn't have any agency. She'd be controlled by them. And they were I think they were even transparent about that. I don't know, but I understand all that. I totally get it. And at the same time, I was still impressed because I don't know. I just think of how hard how much the temptation would have been there. And I know that he tried to take that. I knew it was hard. It did show that it was hard for him. But anyway.
I think there was an element of him letting go as well that was kind of a little bit of character growth over the time. I think there was when he was blinded by the light.
Sorry. I couldn't.
Nope, that's exactly what I was going for. I did that on purpose. So when he was blind, when his eyes just there was a moment of acceptance there. I thought, where he finally accepted essentially the inevitable, where he finally stepped into that prescient moment of like, hey, I know exactly what's going to happen, and I have to be okay with it.
I mean, yeah, and you definitely see that at the very end when he really accepts sort of a more Fremen traditional route to go into the desert as a blind man. I mean, he doesn't try to put himself above that tradition.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that, where, there were at least one, if not multiple, mentions of Chaney saying, "Why can't we just go to the desert? Can we just go back to the siege and, live like we did?" And him kind of not only giving up Chaney, but also becoming, fully blind and accepting his fate as a blind Fremen would. I think that was a really kind of good, not quite circular, but like a really good arc for him.
So. Yep. And definitely kind of goes back, kind of drives home a little bit of, Frank Herbert's point of like, kind of anti-imperialism, hey, the Fremen were fine before all this empire stuff showed up. And it's not a bad way of living, and we shouldn't change that just because we can, just because they're barbarians or whatever. Because a lot of the elements, from what I know, a lot of the elements of the Fremen culture are taken primarily from, I believe it was Muslim and Buddhist influences. And at the time,
Sunni or something.
Yeah. And at the time, those were religions and philosophies that he really admired and was studying heavily. So it kind of, it's like, hey, this philosophy ain't too bad. Don't change what's don't if it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of, to a certain extent.
Yeah, it actually toward the very end of the book, one of the passages that I marked, it's right after Paul goes into the desert. Idaho stared again into the desert, feeling himself become whole, one person capable of seeing the pattern of what Paul had created. Judgment strategy, the Atreides called it in their training manuals. People are subordinate to government, but the ruled influence the rulers. Did the ruled have any concept, he wondered, of what they had helped create here? So it's kind of like Paul is a micro representation of, oddly enough, ironically, the thing that he created as well. Like he helped create himself and create this system that is in fact ruling him. So it's weird. Yeah, hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. Rest in peace, Muad'Dib.
Well,
you're not wrong.
It's true. So
he did.
He did. I mean, or is he? You never know.
That's true.
But yeah. So we're at an hour, and I know people want to go to bed. I sure do.
Are you kidding? I've got reading to do.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to finish this book tonight. Come on. And packing.
All right, nerds. So
I really wish I could finish this book in a night, but
Triple God. Are you finally on the last book?
Last book. So upsetting.
Yes.
Yeah.
How far are you in?
This
Which,
is a
by the
question.
way, Dune influenced Malazan Book of the Fallen.
Oh, nice.
Influenced Stephen Erickson. Yeah, it was a big influence on him. Mm-hmm.
So apart from Pete, are you guys going to continue and read Children of Dune?
100%. I just need to figure out how and when to fit it in.
I have been told that in no uncertain terms, I'm not allowed to not read Children of Dune. And that if I do, someone will show up at my house with a baseball bat and break my legs.
I don't know who that was.
I gave you an out, Andrew. I gave you an out. But yeah. So
what are you,
I mean, it's just amazing to me just how many ideas are packed into this one book. Like it, as small of a book as it is, like
very tiny,
like
mass market.
There's
tiny.
so much more. Yeah, I read the ebook version.
So I will say it's been 15 years since I last read Children of Dune. So Pete, you would have much fresher memories of it. I'm really excited to kind of reacquaint myself with Children of Dune. And if you guys read To God Emperor of Dune, of what I recall of it, there's a lot of seeds planted in Dune Messiah that are really exploring God Emperor.
Which one is that? Is that the fourth or the fifth or fourth? Okay. Yeah, I've been told, everyone says to read at least the first 4 books, although some people say read on past that. I do want to commit to the first 4.
Yeah, the 5th and 6th, again, from what I recall, just they seem like starts to a new overall arc that remained unfinished because Frank Herbert's death. And
unfinished.
He died.
His son supposedly finished it.
I refuse to read anything by Brian Herbert.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Again, it's just a thing I have. Like,
Yeah.
it's not the original author. Like,
let it rest.
Let it rest.
Yeah, from what I know, they're completely different books. I think, for me personally, I'm leaning towards stopping at God Emperor for now. I think at some point I might read the Brian Herbert stuff, but I think I'll read it like when I have more time to invest in it, and I don't have 7 bajillion series that I really want to read a lot more.
So in 20 years.
Yeah,
20 to 30. Make it 30 or 40 just to be safe.
Okay.
Probably Brandon Sanderson will probably have all the leather bounds of Way of Kings or leather bounds of all of Stormlight Archive done by then.
I
Yeah,
won't own those.
I am dead set on collecting those because they're beautiful. But it's a completely different series. Like if you read some of the Star Wars stuff that Kevin J. Anderson has written, I've heard it's kind of similar to that, and then kind of like the philosophy of some of the stuff is kind of twisted. And there's a channel called Quinn's Ideas. He has a lot of good Dune content. Like check that out. Like
I will leave a link to that down below as well.
Oh,
yes.
Okay, cool.
He's great. I love some of his discussions of Dune. I've gotten a lot of like good ideas from there.
He has a great video. Well, I mean, he has a lot of great videos about Dune, but one of the ones that I really, really like is his argument about whether there are aliens in Dune. It's really cool.
Aren't the navigators aliens?
No.
I would argue that they're not. Like, basically, I think the Dune universe is a answer to the Fermi paradox that there are no other intelligent life in the galaxy, in the universe, and it's just humanoids.
They're evolved humans that have evolved from essentially heavy spice addiction.
Yep.
Essentially, like heavy spice addiction. Like, hi, we swim in. I mean, there was the tank that was literally a tank full of spice.
I vaguely remember one of the book covers of Dune having a worm with a face on it.
That's different.
That is different, and that is spoilery.
Very
spoilery.
It's a cover from the 70s.
No, I don't want to know anything.
That's why I'm not going to say anything.
You'll understand it by the end.
I have seen that cover before, though, and it looks so cool. Yeah. I want to have all those vintage editions. That'd be so fun.
Yeah, you'll definitely understand by the end of Children of Dune why that cover.
I have one of the older ones like right here.
I love weird stuff. I have no problem with weird stuff in books. So
awesome. All right. With that, because who doesn't love weird stuff? If you're here, come on. This is weird. Like, so whatever. Anyways, thank you for watching this video. Thank you guys for joining me for this awesome discussion. Maybe in a couple of months we'll talk Children of Dune. But whenever that happens, I will definitely regather everybody up, and we'll definitely talk about that when we talk about it, and I'll leave a link down below when that happens. And until then, thank you so much for joining me again. I really, really appreciate it. Everyone, check these guys out. They are awesome. And see you guys later.
Bye.